Welcome to the Qualitex podcast. I'm Kugel, your host, and this is the second part of my talk with Matthew Lancaster. Matthew is head of quality and regulatory pharma recruitment at EPM Scientific. In this episode, Matthew will continue to demystify the world of headhunting in the pharmaceutical industry. He will also share valuable information for graduates and experts on how to increase their chances while looking for new challenges. You will also learn the answers to intriguing questions such as is it better to stay at one company for many years or instead switch often? So let's get right to it. And you mentioned some key professions in the pharma. So do you find it's the same for each country, or it deviates from country to country, and each country has maybe its own focus point? For example, Germany, UK. So what are the most interesting profession there in the pharma? If people also want to relocate when they say, okay, I cannot find a job in Germany, maybe I'll go to UK, maybe I'll go to France.
So even before the global pandemic, that was a difficult and complex question to ask. Depending on your profession, that may restrict a barrier to entry for a particular profession in a country. One thing that is easier is the EU Schengen Agreement, the free movement of labour. But even so, just to say that you can go and live and work there doesn't necessarily mean that you may qualify. For example, in Germany, to be a qualified person and to release products, you have to be a German speaker and you have to have a German university degree. That is clear.
Is it so?
From my understanding, that has always been the case, that you have to have a German university degree.
I'm pretty
and you have to be German.
Okay, because I think I read something else about it, that actually if you are already a qualified person in a different country, it should be also viable in Germany.
So in any other EU country, if you're a registered EU QP, you can technically be a QP in any other EU nation. And I was always under that impression. But from working in Germany and with Germans and speaking to German QPs,
then you see the reality that it may be different, maybe not because of the laws, but maybe on the requirements of the German companies.
So from my understanding, now I could be wrong, but from my understanding and from the way I've worked for years on QPs, particularly because that's what I've always focused on, I've always been under the impression that that is the rule. And that has always been one of the challenges of getting QPs in Germany for QP jobs, because there is not enough QPs in Germany to fill a QP job. Now, whether they are relaxing the laws in Germany to allow Europeans who are non-German speakers, or maybe German speakers but don't come from Germany or don't have a German university degree, that may be the case, and I need to do a bit more research on that. But from my understanding, the majority of the requirements due to Annex 13, 14, and 15, or AMG, you have to be a German speaker with a German university degree, but you can also be an Austrian. So there is still some confusion around that, because one of the issues in Germany is that you can't get any German QPs. So maybe the law is changing. I'll have to double check on that. But that has always been something that I've always found particularly challenging.
So there is a shortage of QPs in Germany, as far as you know right now. Only in Germany, or is it the same like with doctors all over the world?
Same everywhere. It is the same everywhere, because I focus on QPs. So I've always networked with QPs, and there's a shortage of QPs everywhere. So if I have a network of QPs and I am able to find them the right job, or if I go to a particular company and say I have a network of QPs, 99% of the time they're interested. Because again, going back to the life science industry, because it's doing so well, and the requirements for a QP to be on site or to release batches per, I think it's on the number of the volume being sold or released from that site. a lot of companies need more QPs.
Mhm.
And if you think of biotech and they become much more specialized, that list is even shorter still.
Mhm. So it's a good career choice from everybody who is right now in a crossroad and thinks, what should I do? Go to quality and maybe think about QPs because you will get a job, at least right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're a QP, you have much more pulling power financially as
Mhm.
well because of the risk that is involved.
Yeah.
Because if you sign off a batch and it kills someone,
Yeah.
or if there's a serious breach of health regulations, you're liable to go to prison. That is why a
Mm.
QP was created. But more than that, the salary reflects that risk, but also the demand for the QPs as well means companies are much more open to negotiating salaries at a different level. As well as if you're looking to become, quality head, VP, senior level, having a QP qualification is always beneficial. And it is more of a fast track to that position as well that I have seen. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be a QP to be a quality head or to be a senior member in a leadership team. But if you are a QP and you have a QP qualification, that will always take preference in my experience than a candidate who hasn't. Now, you don't have to be releasing a QP, but the fact that you have that option, if you want to have a QP, you don't then have to hire a QP. You have someone that you can just put on the EU
Mhm.
register. But it also shows that that person is able to make difficult decisions. Because if a QP refuses to sign off a batch, that could be tens of millions lost.
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility,
A
and
lot of responsibility.
you need to balance the
Yeah.
politics inside the companies
Yeah.
and with the safety of the consumer.
And if you can show that, that is also valuable to a lot of companies in leadership positions because there's maybe a lot of difficult decisions. But also you can understand different technical experiences or really hard situations that many people may not have experienced before
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah,
So I'm not saying it's the magic qualification, but it does
it
carry a
opens
heavy
doors.
weight.
Mhm.
It does, absolutely. But in my opinion, people may disagree, but in my opinion, in the recruitment that I've done, that has been my personal view, my personal
Yeah,
experience on the recruitment.
yeah. I guess it does. It cannot hurt even if you don't work in a QP role, but you're qualified as a QP. You can much easily get to some positions where leadership role is required and decision making role is required. So what's also interesting, so we talked, okay, the QP is a good direction, and I know that generally getting right now into pharma, at least in Germany, and I also know it from forums and from other graduates. So
Yeah,
I was lucky when I graduated with a master's degree. I already had experience from a pharma industry because what I did, and I think it was smart. After I finished my bachelor's degree, I went working. I went to pharma into quality control as an analyst.
yeah,
Then I continued with my master's degree. But as I see the situation now, people who go directly to a master's degree or a PhD degree, they have so much difficulties landing a job. And I also get sometimes some, because I'm doing all those videos, and people start finding me through some student colleges and so far. So they ask me, how can I get a job right now from the university? So I got a master's degree in biotech or biology, and they just stuck. They try
yeah,
for a year or two, they just cannot land a job. So I don't know if it's all over the Europe, but I think in Germany the problem is quite harsh because there is this problem of overqualification. So from one side, you don't have enough experience to work in GMP
yeah,
environments, but you're overqualified to work in a lab, for example.
yeah.
So how do you overcome it? What would you suggest as a recruiter? What should such people do?
Yeah. So this is where the paradox of the industry comes into, because there are jobs, but not enough people to fill them. And then there are a lot of people who need jobs, but they don't have the right experience to get into the
Mhm.
industry. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword,
Mhm.
very difficult to break into. Personally, I've never worked at graduate level, so I don't think it would be fair for me to comment so much on advice, because I haven't experienced that. I wouldn't know how to answer that question as effectively as possible for that person who is struggling with those things to take seriously. One thing that I could advise is, from just a professional point of view, is to be willing to consider opportunities outside of your local area. Now, I know that might sound difficult because you have families and you have,
But at least shortly, right? So for a
but
year, two. Mhm.
if it means you get the experience, it's back when you go to 100 years ago, and this is a bit of a tangent, but it's still relative. If you think about the Industrial Revolution in England and the development of urban areas,
Mhm.
those things developed because people had to move from rural areas to urban areas to get the job, to find work. You know, it's the old
Mhm.
proverb of, is that you go where the work is. And I think that hasn't changed to some extent. If you're struggling to get something locally, or if there is still challenges and barriers to entry, we have at our disposal all the technologies to hand, which means we're more connected than ever, but have been never further apart. So, what we can also do with the EU and the Schengen Agreement is going to the Netherlands. You can cross an invisible border to Switzerland.
Mhm.
Yes, it's much more physical at the moment with global pandemic, but that's a different topic. But in theory, you can go to the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Spain, Italy, wherever, and work. It might be
Mhm.
difficult and it is a personal choice, but if it means you get that experience for the rest of your career, you're going to reflect on that time and think, I'm glad I did that. Because not only do you also get to get the experience of the industry, but you may also experience a different culture. You may
Mhm.
also feel that you loved it there, and it gives you a broader perspective.
Mhm.
So
So
one
what?
thing that,
So I just wanted to ask, what countries are more open for people with different um, graduation levels. So, for example, in Germany, if you have a PhD, you cannot do low-level jobs because there's like the pay grades, and it's quite I think it's quite strict here, and quite old-fashioned
yeah,
here in this regard. In many industries, especially the bigger companies that exist for a really long time. So they believe, okay, if you have a PhD, it means you
yeah,
can easily become a manager, and you don't have to go up the scale to start for the bottom. For example, what's completely
yeah,
different in the USA, for example, that you start from the bottom and you go up. So it's from the worse and the better. It's different. So if people, for example, did this and they achieved a higher degree that allows them to enter easily to the
yeah.
pharmaceutical industry, what countries are easier to start? Which you don't care if you have a master's degree, bachelor's degree, they will still put you in the lab or put you on the ground in the
Yeah.
manufacturing.
The Netherlands
The
is
Netherlands.
a fantastic example of that. You don't even need to have a degree to work in the
Mhm.
pharmaceutical
But the question,
industry.
if you have a degree, would they say, okay, no, you're overqualified? So sometimes this is the problem, the overqualification.
It depends. I mean, I can't say that the Netherlands is the answer. And if everyone who's overqualified, or if everyone has a PhD will get a job in the Netherlands. But in the Netherlands, all I can comment on is that You can work in the
Mm-hmm.
pharmaceutical industry in the Netherlands without a university degree.
Mm-hmm.
They have something called a HBO, which means you've gone to a further education and got practical experience. It may limit your it may limit the development of your career to a manager level
Mm-hmm.
or a senior level, but it doesn't stop you from working in an entry level,
Mm-hmm.
for example.
And sometimes this is the most important part to get the first experience, to put the foot inside, to learn about GMP a bit. So you get the ground rules, and then you can come back to your country or move to another country and say, okay, I did it.
Yeah. And I think that frustratingly enough at the moment that's going to be a change in attitudes that will slowly develop. It's not going to help people immediately now who need help, but people also need to be advised is to not lose faith.
Mhm.
If you get rejected once, don't take it personally, don't be downhearted. Apply for everything that's relevant and anything that you believe you're relevant for. Because someone will want your experience, someone will see value. And that could still be in Germany, could be in the Netherlands, it could be in Italy, it could be in Switzerland, it could be in Austria. If you're open to working in the industry and you're open to working anywhere that could give you that opportunity, then it's only going to be beneficial for each person. But don't limit yourselves. One area that I would think is a really good area to focus on for graduates is contract manufacturers. They are exploding at the minute. And the global pandemic has also shown the need for big pharma companies to use them. Another one is CROs. You may not directly be working for Pfizer or Novartis, but if you work for a global contract manufacturer like Lonza, Catalent, Thermo Fisher, Recipharm, CROs like PRA Health Sciences, for example, Parexel, those are the kind of
Mhm.
companies that are also hiring people who have masters and PhDs, because you have to be at an educational level where you can explain to customers how it works. So that could also be a really good option for
Mhm.
people who are
Yeah.
struggling to look at. And there are fantastic websites that I'd be happy to share with you after, Jan, in
Yeah,
email
please.
if you have people
Mhm.
that list all the different companies that you could
Mhm.
contact, all the different CROs in Germany alone, which is an interactive map. It does take time and investment. And there will be some agencies who could help you, but the majority of those agencies are graduate level and they have job boards. If you're relevant, they'll interview you, but they won't proactively network for you. But if you do it upon yourself, you take control of that
Mhm.
yourself and you contact these different people and you just send your CV to HR, someone somewhere will see value in that and will want to interview you.
Mhm.
So I would probably advise CMOs and CROs is a
Yeah, this.
really great
Mhm.
focus area.
Yeah, that's a good start because it's small. There are many of them. And you can probably find some maybe low-level jobs where you can learn and build yourself into this area. And what's interesting, so you go with the candidate throughout the process, right? So the question is, when a candidate doesn't get the job, do you know the reason why? Do they share it with you, the companies?
So yeah, they should do. We always strive for feedback and we
Yeah.
always pass that back
So
on to
it's
the candidates.
interesting. Most of the, if you could say, I don't know if you just as a rule of thumb, most of the people fail to get to land the job because of some technical skills or some soft skills, or maybe they're not prepared for the interview, or maybe they
Yep.
worked in some company too long and they just forgot how to do it. So what's the main cause of failure?
I would say the main cause of failure is usually a difference in culture,
Mhm.
because people like to work with people. And even though you're technically good, if you don't show that you want to work there and that you've fully researched their culture, their values, and if you don't assimilate with those values, it's very difficult to convince people that you're the right candidate, regardless if you have the best technical skills. What I always advise is with my clients, if you have two candidates, one candidate who is, I use that word, perfect for the job. Okay, say if they're perfect for the job. I know my comments earlier, but just run with me. They're perfect for the job, and you have candidate B, who may have less years of experience, but has all of the background and the educational level. Candidate A is a bit aloof, is a bit disengaged in the process. And you have candidate B, who has showcased, very strongly their emotional reasons for wanting to join the company and how they can develop. Logically, candidate A would be a better candidate because technically they can do the job better, technically. But one could argue, but because the other candidate is more engaged culturally, they will be much more efficient in the job. Technically, you can develop someone technically. It's very difficult to engage someone and motivate them if they do not want to work there.
Mhm. So I think here also comes the maybe the EQ, the engagement with the people on the personal level, because I think also today people want to work with people who are similar to them and with the culture, and they don't want conflicts.
I would disagree on that comment,
Okay.
because if you're a strong leader and if you can recognize that your team needs to develop, I use a football analogy.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a team of Ronaldos. A team of Ronaldos are not going to win a game.
Mm-hmm.
You need a team of 11 people with different strengths for a unit. So another thing that to consult that we have with clients is that even though they have a different personality, doesn't mean that they can't do that job as effective.
Mm-hmm.
But the motivations to want to work there should be as strong. Now, their motivations to want to work there may be completely different to someone else, but it should still be logical. And
Mm-hmm.
to them, as long as they are coming across as someone who is either passionate or logical, and that the decision for them means that they will add value or that they will benefit from accepting this
Mm-hmm.
job than any other, that's still as strong. Because if you have people who are as like-minded, then one could argue that jobs may never get done.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have someone who is particularly good at one thing but is more introverted, it's just a different platform for managers to recognize and for get the best out of the different people.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't differentiate between different personalities because one thing is clear. Someone who is extroverted and someone who is introverted doesn't make them any less capable. It just means how they engage with different people. But identifying what their strengths are and how they can add to the unit is much more beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
If they're
And
more
that's the
extrovert,
difficulty actually
in
to
that
find, because I think
yes,
there is it's also the bias, and I think that's also why it's really important to have the conversation, different types of people, maybe someone who is not the direct manager, because I think the bias is where people still unknowingly look for someone who they will like to work with, even if they're not
yes.
the best for the job. And you say, okay, I'm an introvert, I would prefer somebody who is maybe a bit quieter, maybe who listens more, talks less, but maybe for this specific job you need someone who louder, who really engaged and goes and likes to work in big communities and be a presenter and so on.
Yeah, and I think that's one part of why we call ourselves consultants as well, because we're not just here to help advise the candidates. We're here to help advise the clients as well. Because yes, there are cases where, bias or a feedback can be given that we may not agree with, that we think is misjudged. it's not to say that, we're right and what we say is gospel, but from an objective point of view, if we can recognize what you've just mentioned, you can't decide whether that candidate is right for the job or not if you don't believe that that person's personality isn't good enough, because that would be unfair to that person. Yes, you may have biases and yes, you may have preferences, but it's like saying, well, I want to hire a man over a woman. Yeah, you can't do that anymore.
Mhm.
You can't do that anymore. And there is a debate among the recruitment industry, and talent acquisition further, that you have blind applications and that you can't make a judgment on an application on someone's name, for example,
Mhm.
because that has already a preconditioned bias
Yeah.
of
Although
what that name
statistically
means.
it still happens, because
Exactly.
you read it and
Yeah,
you see also a lot of statistics also in German that say if the person has a Middle Eastern name, they're less likely to be invited. So it still
exactly.
happens, and although we're trying to be politically correct, but it still slips in.
And I think it's healthy to have that debate and to have that conversation, because people don't do it knowingly. People don't do it out of any kind
Mhm.
of malice or any kind of resentment, or I don't believe through racism either.
Mhm.
But it is an issue, and
Mhm.
you have to recognize it's an issue. And I think it's interesting that some people are even calling for you know there to be the recruitment industry to be AI, and that
Mhm.
artificial
Yeah, something
intelligence
that
will
doesn't
do
see the names, it just calculates the numbers.
and matches it on that,
Yeah.
and that is a
And I
completely
think
different topic to
isn't that
debate.
many big companies actually have this, that they they have some automation that calculates the keywords or something like this.
I think that what they would probably have is a scanner just to tell you how many times a keyword comes up.
Mm.
Because another thing that we also have to navigate through is that you would think logically that hiring managers who has a CV from yourself, Jan, let's use you as
Mm.
an example. If I was to introduce you to a manufacturing facility for a QA manager in a GMP area, now you are a GMP expert, correct?
Mm.
Now, say on your CV, it would to say all of the companies that you would work for that you would know logically looking at a CV, you would know that person would come from GMP. Yeah.
Mhm.
But if you were to put that through the scanner and yet GMP was not recognized or stated or anywhere on your CV and is not picked up, you would not be picked
Yeah.
because the keyword is not there.
Yeah.
So
So it's such a problem right now.
it
And
is.
it maybe also people like it's the same as SEO with websites. So people is stop doing a real good content, and they just think about let's put more keywords, only that we just pop out in the search. And I think it also starts to be like that uh, in the recruiting area. And I think you read about it in many books right now. I remember it from years ago when I looked for a job here in Europe, and in many places it mentions many companies have those automated tools. You need to take the keywords from the job description, and you need to use as many as you
Yeah.
can.
It's ridiculous.
So
It's
you would
ridiculous.
pop
Yeah.
up in the system.
Yeah. Yeah. And you may miss out on a job because you wouldn't know that, and you would assume that you would be chosen because you can identify that your skills is what they're looking for, but the computer wouldn't pick it up.
Mm.
And hiring managers sometimes reject candidates that I have submitted because they haven't looked at CVs properly. Said, oh well, these candidates they're not from a GMP background. What do you mean? They've worked for all these different manufacturing companies in pharma. I don't understand your feedback. I need you to have another look. And then they have another look, and that, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'll
Mm.
request an interview, because they don't have time to flick through them properly.
Mm. So they
Is
just
another problem as
scan
well.
it.
They just skim, just scan.
Yeah, so I guess it's also still correct. So people really, making a CV today is an art, because you need to understand the same like website. We scan website because our time is so limited. So also the CVs really need to point. They shouldn't be a life story. It should be really specific to a job and really specify the
Yeah,
still the keywords, even for not for a computer, but for a person. If he needs someone in quality
yeah.
and some quality system, just use the important words from your
So,
experience.
well, and this is some of the consultation that I pass on to candidates that I
Mm,
engage with. Is that look, I know that you have this experience, and we can discuss it, but you're going to have to send me a more detailed CV. You're going to have to highlight these things because I know if I submit them,
mm.
and it may be HR sometimes because HR are just looking for keywords. I know if I submit them, if it's not in there, they will assume you don't have it.
Yeah, so maybe the manager and the person who hires you would understand, because you use some because they understand from your position that you know it, but the HR that just does the first review, they would just throw it away because they look for the
They don't
keywords.
exactly. Yeah, and I think that is also something that a consultant has to differentiate, whether it's between HR and the hiring manager, so that you can consult on that and identify that. But I think that what we strive for
Mhm,
is to eradicate as much as that as possible, as much as that confusion as possible, because when we interview candidates, we interview them on questions such as, you know, location, do they have restrictions and financial restrictions, or notice periods, or if they can relocate.
mhm,
And usually, that there are back again to the different priorities that people have and different situations that you can provide for them. But it also allows us to consult them on those factors as well. It's like, because they may have expectations for that are unrealistic. If they live in a remote location, and they can't relocate, but yet they're expecting to work for Pfizer, who are on the other side of the country, you'd be like, well, you have to reconsider your expectations because it's not going to happen because you're not going to be able to relocate there. And I think that service is also something that AI cannot provide
mhm.
because it's nowhere near advanced enough for any industry to be advising on anything. So one thing that we can also add is consultation on limitations or restrictions, and that all comes through being local specialists as well, an industry specialist. So say if they want to move into, say if they're in generics or in small molecules, and yet they want to move into large molecules, if they're in quality, that may be very difficult for them to do so because the manufacturing is very difficult. But you can argue that the GMP compliance is the same, quality systems similar. It's just a different manufacturing facility and environment. So you can advise them on
Mm,
that, but it is difficult. And I think people see value in that as well because one thing that is clear, people don't have time to do it themselves. They just don't. And they may not see or know or are aware of different avenues that they could go down because they just don't have time to think about it. They're
mm.
so busy with their current job,
Yeah.
they just don't have time. And that's something that we can also advise them on, is just understanding their situation and where they would like to be in the future. We go back to the QP topic. If somebody wants to be a QP in Germany, you have to have 2 years experience of a QC lab. Now, if you want to be a QP and you've only ever done QA, you'd have to tell that person, well, unless you get 2 years experience in the QC lab, you can't become a QP. And then I think they get some kind of clarity on that, because if you know you can't do it, then then you're going to have to
Mm,
change your expectations, which is another thing that we can advise them on. Or if someone wants to become a QP but they don't know how to, we say, well, what have you asked internally? What options are available to you internally? And so, well, I've asked all these questions and nothing's come back, and I'm feeling frustrated. Like, well, have you thought about contacting different companies, or have you even been taught on how to become a QP? Do you know what avenue you need to go to? Now, I know that this client Y are looking for people with your background to hire as a QP, and they may never have heard of that company because not many people know of all the companies as well. So that's also an insight that we can give into the different competitors in the region they may never have heard of as well. But it's just about setting your value and your purpose from the beginning. So it kind of brings us full circle to the beginning of the conversation.
So that's another good value of the recruiters, that they know more companies, they know the little tweaks that a person needs to do. So a good consultant would also help with the CV in that effect.
Yeah, and also we have a vested interest for it to be successful.
Yeah, so you get paid for it. So of course you want them to succeed.
Absolutely, and you know, the more we can help our candidates to put them in the best possible position through interview preparation, the stronger it puts us in as a team for that client to want to hire that person. And if we are helping that candidate to prepare, then obviously we want to ensure that the client is getting the best candidate. So we put all these measures in place to make sure that we differentiate between the serious candidates and the non-serious candidates. And the non-serious candidates usually don't like it when we turn around to them and say, well, we're not willing to work with you anymore because you aren't serious. We appreciate you're busy and you have a job, but our job is not to find you a job. That's the first and foremost. It's not to find you a job. Our job essentially is to find the best job for the best person and the best person for the best job. So we have an agreement with the client. So first and foremost, we have to find the best candidate for the client. But we do that in a way where we are networking with a pocket of candidates that we can use with different clients. So we're offering each candidate that we work with multiple options so that they can compare and that they can see what may be the best option. Rather than just working with 4 or 5 candidates for one position, that doesn't make financial sense for us as a business or for them as a candidate, because we're not offering them the best value by just offering them one position. We advise and we do encourage candidates to have multiple choices. And usually they do, because you're all smart people. You know, people realize that if this isn't the right job for me, there may be others. And we also have to identify, if it's not the right job, what could be better. And we also have to be strong in our own assessment by saying and acknowledging that, no, this is probably not the right opportunity. Let's forget it and let's focus on something else. And I think candidates are also find that refreshing.
Yeah,
because they don't feel
it's good
pressured.
because I think this is what sometimes is misses for this relationship. They're saying, no, I think this is not a good job for you, because many, as we talked about in the beginning, many recruiters and consultants would just say, yeah, just send me the CV, you're perfect, we'll get it done, and then just a time waste for the business, for the recruiter. It's a waste of time for the candidate and for the company. That they just need to scroll off those, and they also see that the recruiter is not serious because he has no idea.
Yeah, and that's when you know if you're speaking to a serious recruiter or not, because they have listened to you and they have recognized that this is not the right opportunity. It's like putting a square peg through a round hole. It's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So by identifying that and getting to know your candidates and recognizing that this isn't right, you should be advising them, look, you're going to hate it here. Let's find you something else. And if you are a specialist and you network, you'll be able to find them multiple options. Now, it might not always be the same one or the same area. It may be something that you may need to reconsider to, focus on going an extra hour in commute. Not ideal, but the job content should be enough for that candidate to think, well, it might be interesting. But there are always different limitations depending on other factors that we've recognized before in terms of the sparsity of the opportunities by local companies, or whether you have restrictions X, Y, and Z. So it can get quite complicated sometimes, but it is quite simple in finding the right job for the right person,
Yeah.
essentially.
I have a last question for you before we wrap it up. So there is this stigma or this understanding that, or this taboo that maybe can be broken, that a person should stay at a company at least like 3 years. Is it correct?
So back to the point earlier about changes in the recruitment of professionals and the benefits that companies can add. There's also been a change in views on what you would call the actual length of time you've worked there. Personally, from my experience, gone are the days where candidates who've been there for 10, 15 years are what people want. Companies, some companies are still naive to that fact that it has changed where candidates themselves want to test themselves in different environments. And also, hiring managers also want to see people who have experienced different environments. What has been apparent is with different changing work environments, there have been different challenges, which means if you have a candidate who's only worked in one environment and they've never experienced a different culture, it's very difficult to develop a new culture or to integrate different cultures. As the life science industry develops and it grows and becomes ever more international, there's always a focus on a more international environment. Now, I'm not saying that is true for every company. There are smaller companies or more traditional companies who have more traditional methods. That's absolutely fine. But when you look at companies who are growing and developing and have ambitions to have regional, international, and global exposure, it is clear that you need an international team. And you don't have to have a team full of people from different nationalities. What I mean to say is that people like to have different experiences of different cultures because there is a very different culture in the way the Americans run business, the way Europeans run business. Further still, the way UK culture is to German culture is very different, a very different culture between Netherlands and Germany. And then you think of like Asian culture. And that in itself is a challenge. And if you're looking at leadership or senior level, if you have understood or if you have experienced different cultures, it broadens your mindset. It gives you different understandings of the way things can work differently. And as you can see now with the collaboration with different companies and the fight for a vaccine for COVID-19, there's always going to be benefits from different cultures and resources combining because people have different ideas. The way things
Mhm.
can be done differently by sharing resources and collaborating. That's a historical fact. In all industries, when companies have collaborated, some of the most ingenious things have come out of it. In terms of recruitment and from a professional point of view, you also have to be careful that you don't get labeled a job hopper or that you have instability, that you jump from job to job because you can't, well, because you want to increase your salary, for
Mhm. So
example.
how to balance it correctly?
It's hard to balance it correctly, but usually between 2 to 3 years is a good time to be in a company. Can be 4, can be 5. If you go above 5, then companies could see it that you're too institutionalized or that you may not be able to adapt to a different culture. And again, coming back to the comment earlier of what is the feedback that we've had on candidates, culture is a big thing. If you can't add to the culture, you don't have to fit in, but if you can't add to the culture, if you can't drive to the achievements that they're looking to drive to and contribute to that, there's no point hiring that person. We have a saying in EPM of our culture from a commercial point of view on us as a business is how can we make the boat go faster? And it's an analogy from a rowing team from, I think, Steve Redgrave, about how you can get everyone in the boat to row simultaneously as much as the next person to make it go faster. And that is a great analogy in your professional career, because as long as you can recognize how your specific role helps contribute to other factors, and that you're not letting colleagues down, that you're not hindering the development or the progress of the team, the unit, the department, the whole business, you think of it as a real minuscule point, then all these factors are taken into consideration. And for people who have been in, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this at all. If you've been in your current position for 10, 15 years, all I'm saying is that there are concerns from a recruitment perspective that that individual may not be able to develop or adapt or change. You see it in mergers and acquisitions. Now, this is a classic example of different cultures merging, and people cannot adapt because they may have been in that specific position or that specific for culture for 10, 15 years. Then all of a sudden, a very German culture has been overtaken by an American company, and they're instilling an American culture. It can be chaos. It can be really challenging. And obviously, that is an extreme point. But what people see in the value of that is how they can adapt. We mentioned it earlier, how you can be agile, how you can respond to situations and scenarios. It's relative to all industries. As we see the technology development, the speed it's developing is changing attitudes and changing the way we work and interact. And it's not just me and you speaking over Skype. No, it's changing the way all of industries are changing. There's a real focus at the minute on patient data and healthcare data, and how we can harness data to help prevent the development of diseases or the development of heart attacks, etc. How you can harness that. And it's just reflective of the way the world is changing and the speed of its changing. And if you can show that you can change and you can develop and you can be successful in different companies and different environments, it just shows that if you were to join a different company, you'd be able to adapt, you'd be able to contribute and actually offer a different insight, because they may not understand a certain point of view. But if you look at it in a different perspective and you have a different answer, but you've been able to solve the problem, then everyone's happy.
Yeah, it's
So it's
really
beneficial.
yeah. So it's really similar to being an auditor in a pharmaceutical environment that goes and visits many companies.
Yes.
He gets a lot of experience, a lot of information that can be later used and learned and brought to other companies. And I think it's really good point that people who
Yeah.
visit and work in different environments, they bring a lot of value to new companies. Much more than if somebody worked in one company for 15 years, and
Yes.
he brings probably a lot of experience, but in a really closed environment, and he may be a bit routine blinded in many areas, and he may come to a new company and say, oh, that's not how we did it, it's probably wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And also it limits friction, because if you have a culture clash, then that is obviously going to be impact efficiency.
Yeah.
But if you have an open culture and people are engaging and collaborating and discussing different ways of working or different narratives, then as we mentioned earlier about the companies collaborating on a vaccine for COVID-19, your company can only benefit from that.
Yeah.
It can only become much more efficient.
Yeah.
It can only become much more transparent for people to work there. And people probably feel more safe and secure because they have an open platform where they know that they're not going to be shouted at or
Yeah.
criticized for having a different opinion. you're actually encouraging different values and
Yeah.
different ways of working, and that can only be beneficial, and people grow from that.
Yeah,
So
100%. 100%. I agree with you 100% that it's great. I think it's a great message for multicultural environments and knowledge sharing, and
yeah,
it helps the pharma
yeah.
from all
But I'm
around.
not I'm not saying that if you've been in your job for 3 years, you have to change. I'm not saying you should do that. If you do have a job and you've been there for 10 years and you absolutely love it,
Yeah, stay
that's all that
there.
matters.
Like,
That's all that matters, as long as you love it. But if you have ambitions to
mhm,
become a corporate and VP and international,
mhm,
these are all the different traits. If you don't have that ambition and that's not your objective, that doesn't matter. As long as whatever you do, as long as you can say at the end of each day that you love what you
yeah,
do and you have a real passion
love
and
the
it gets you
process,
out and it gets
not
you
the
out of bed
check.
every morning. Exactly. It gets you out of bed every single
Mhm,
morning and
yeah,
it makes you happy. That is all that matters. And that's what I strive for as well, because I may be a recruiter or a headhunter, but I do love my job. And I love working with people who love their job. People are so passionate about what they do. And when I'm able to find them something that they love and they find and they are actually overjoyed that they have this opportunity, I am so enthralled. It makes my job so worthwhile knowing that we've been able to open up a new door for
mhm,
someone and can make them happy, or giving them something that they never even knew that they could have. And such a it's difficult to describe. It's difficult to describe, but that's what gets me out of bed every morning.
yeah.
Um, and that's why I love what I do.
Perfect. Yeah. So that's an amazing message. So I think it's the perfect message, and the passion, and that you love what you do, and that your mission is to bring people to their dream work, so they
Yeah,
can wake up with a smile. So this is an
absolutely. Yeah.
amazing message. So thank you very much for sharing all this information, Matthew. And tell me if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do it? What is the best way?
So the best way is email. Please email me. My email is matthew.lancaster@epmscientific.com, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I am more than happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. I'm not as responsive on LinkedIn. I have to recognize that I am not the best, but email is always the best way to contact me. But I am trying to be better on LinkedIn. Um, but I am easily accessible. I'm more than happy to network with people if they want any advice or careers. One thing I would note is that I do get a lot of requests. I can't answer everyone, but I do try and get through as many as possible.
Perfect. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Qualitox podcast. If you did, please consider sharing it and subscribing. Stay compliant and see you in the next one.